Hello, and welcome to this first lesson on the Weimar Republic and Nazi Germany. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves there. Okay, so this is actually part of a GCSE paper. This is paper 3, and this is one of the depth studies. So yes, paper 3, this is Weimar and Nazi Germany. Our first topic is going to be the Weimar Republic from 1918 to 1929. And our first lesson today is going to be the origins of the Weimar Republic. So our key focuses today are going to be the legacy of World War I, the abdication of the Kaiser and the Armistice and Revolution of 1918 to 1919, how the Weimar Republic was set up, and the strengths and weaknesses of the new constitution. Okay, so before we get into the lesson, I would highly recommend buying this text. This is going to be very much geared towards the EdXL syllabus, and I would buy the textbook specifically for the course. Now, and for GCSE, if you are doing the IGCSE, Rise of Nazi Germany, Rise of Dictatorship in Nazi Germany, you can definitely benefit from these sessions. Just keep in mind that the exam questions in the exam structure is different. Okay. So yes, definitely get the exam. We will be looking, the presentation that I'm going to give and the outline I'm going to give today is going to deal with the text pages about 8 to 16. Okay, so let's begin. So first thing we're going to look at is the effects of World War I on Germany. So Europe in general was devastated by World War I. It was called the war to end all wars for a reason. Now Germany was no exception. All able-bodied men had to go and fight on the front. So Germany being a largely agrarian country at the time, this disrupted their farm production greatly. Not that women weren't capable of doing the job, it was just fewer people, so the yields dropped. So by 1918, Germany was only producing 50% of the milk and 60% of the bread that had been producing before. German ports had been blocked by the British Navy, and so they could not import food. Many Germans faced starvation. Between 1916 and 1917, Germany ran out of potatoes. Now, potatoes are like a main staple. They're very basic. So if you're running out of something like that, that shows that things are very dire. They're also quite easy to grow. The people were very weak and disease was rampant. And an estimated 750,000 Germans died from hunger and disease. Now that is a staggering number in just about any situation. But you add to that that is the beginning of the 20th century, and that is shocking. Okay, so those were the physical effects. Now, there were some huge psychological effects on Germany due to World War I. Germany was a very proud nation of what they accomplished. Now, before the war, they had been proud and ambitious people, and they were prepared to work hard. They were still prepared to work hard after the war, but they were very bitter and very angry by what happened. So experiences of the war made them very bitter and angry, having to accept responsibility, and we'll get into the war guilt clause and all of that later on. People looked for someone to blame for the loss. And once a country that was united and proud was now a country full of conflict. So you had lots of different factions against each other, and they blamed one person, and that was the Kaiser. Okay, so Germany was looking like it could fall into a state of anarchy. There wasn't enough food, there wasn't enough work, their infrastructure was destroyed. Who was going to help? So it was very unstable at the time. There were also armed and mobilized soldiers returning home from the front. So there were joint violent demonstrations against the war and the Kaiser, because the Kaiser was the leader. Germany had what they called the Reichstag, or a parliament, but it was incredibly weak. So it was mostly the Kaiser that ruled the country. So he was who the people looked to solve the problems, and when he couldn't, they blamed him. There are also a lot of political effects on Germany due to World War I. So there were problems before the war, as the Reichstag was very weak. So the Kaiser could just do what he wanted. Working and even middle-class people had very little say in how the country was run. So it wasn't like today where everyone has a vote in parliament. No effective opposition during the war, and this made it worse as the leaders were imprisoned. So if you stood up to the Kaiser, you usually ended up in jail. And Germany was ruled as a military dictatorship. Okay, well, after the war, they realized that they couldn't continue this way. Well, actually, before the war ended, they realized they couldn't continue this way. So you have the beginnings of the Weimar Republic. Germany wanted to end the war. They were losing. They were not going to win. They wanted to surrender. They wanted a way out somehow with hopefully their pride intact. In early October 1918, a new government formed, and this was led by Prince Max of Baden. He asked Woodrow Wilson from the US about ending the war. He was president at the time. Wilson said no. He refused, and he said there would be no peace talks until Kaiser Wilhelm was removed. So that put them in quite a difficult situation because the Kaiser was not going to go willingly. At the end of October 1918, the German Navy mutinied. It was called the Kiel Mutiny. Now, a mutiny in itself is bad enough, but when the public got wind of this, thinking our own men are mutinying against our own side, that sends a message. So the sailors refused to attack British Navy as they felt it was foolish and would threaten the peace talks. They were probably correct on both accounts. They were weakened. Attacking the British Navy would have been a suicide mission. And again, they wouldn't have got the peace talks and the war would have just continued on. And this spread unrest across Germany. People are starting to question. Keep in mind that this is a time where we did not have television. We did not have the news networks that we have today. People relied on the radio, and the news was usually heavily censored during the war. So nobody really realized how bad the situation was until news of this got out. And when they found out, people wanted change. So by November 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm's government had lost control of the situation. They were fighting factions, they had the mutiny, the war was going terribly. People were now starting to figure out that they were in a deep, dire situation. The USA would only end the war if he left. So on the 9th of November, Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated and fled to Holland. Probably very much on his terms, but he stepped down. So they did not have to forcibly remove him. Philip Scheidemann of the SPD, this was the biggest party in parliament, acted fast due to communist rioting. And he declared that the Kaiser had gone and a new German republic had begun. Yay. Friedrich Ebert, the SPD leader, became the new chancellor. Okay, well, this is a good start. This made people happy, but things did not just fix themselves overnight. On the 10th of November, Ebert suspended the old Reichstag because it was very weak and not doing much anyway, or the old parliament, and named 6 moderate politicians who would form the Council of People's Representatives. Now, this council would head the government of the country, but only until a new constitution could be agreed upon. By taking these steps, moderate politicians in the SPD were able to take control of Germany, preventing anarchy or a takeover by communist extremists. And they were very fearful of this. Keep in mind that in 1917, you had the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. The czars were overthrown. They did not want a similar situation happening in Germany. Okay, so setting up this republic. How do you make a republic? Well, 9 months from November 1918 to July 1919 were uneasy for the new republic whilst a new government was being put in place. Ebert took several steps to increase people's confidence in the new republic. He arranged for the civil servants who had helped run Germany under the Kaiser to stay in office. So there weren't a lot of people that lost their jobs and had to be replaced. He kept people in place, which was a sense of relief, I'm sure. They were instructed to work alongside soldiers and workers' councils where people had set these up. This ensured that the state would keep running, for example, collected taxes and running public services such as schools. So they had their basics, the basics were met. Okay, he also reassured General Groner that the army would not be reformed and officers would keep their ranks. So again, reassuring people that they're going to change as little as possible if they can. In return, Groner agreed to use the German army to help keep the new republic in power. So that was a good trade. Ebert also reassured leaders of industry like coal and shipping, entrepreneur Hugo Steins, that the new republic would not confiscate land or factories and that there would be no nationalization or state control of private industries. So again, trying to reassure people as much as possible. And this helped ensure that businesses and the economy continued to operate. Finally, Ebert won the support of the trade unions. He promised their leader, Karl Ligon, that the new republic would try to achieve an 8-hour working day. Despite Ebert's efforts, some extreme political parties were still dissatisfied. Demonstrations and even riots were common in the major cities, and Germany was still on the edge of anarchy. So despite all the things that he did accomplish, it didn't solve all the problems. But still, Ebert had achieved a fragile control, which lasted long enough to agree a new constitution for the new republic. So it kept things at bay long enough to get the constitution written down. Scheidemann formed a coalition government with the Center Party, the ZP, and the German Democratic Party, the DDP. Okay, this is actually a task that I will give to you on a sheet, but what you will do is you'll read this text and create a storyboard showing the steps from World War I to the creation of the Weimar Republic. Okay, but this will be an additional task that you can do on Word or something. That's the storyboard sheet. Okay, so you have some vocabulary words here that we can look at. We've got armistice, Kaiser Wilhelm, the Kiel Mutiny, the Weimar Republic, Constitution, democracy, Article 48, and proportional representation. So what I will do is I'm going to actually pause the video for a bit, give you a chance to work on that, see how well you do, and then we'll go over the answers. Okay, so let's have a look at these and let's see how we did. Okay, so here's the answers. Oops, no, hang on a minute. Okay, well, armistice. I get my annotation tools out. Oh, darn it, what's the slide again? Oh, I know why. Okay. Well, let's try it. Okay. Oops. Here we go. Sorry about that. All right. Armistice. The annotation tools up. Let's hope I don't stop the share again. Okay, so the armistice ended Germany's involvement in World War I, but many Germans did feel betrayed. Okay, so Kaiser Wilhelm. These all go in order. There we go. The leader of Germany until 1918, after he abdicated, the Weimar Republic was formed. Okay, here we go, the Kiel Mutiny. I see what they've done. They mixed the order up. When German sailors refused to fight anymore, the Weimar Republic, obviously the new period in Germany that ran from 1919 to 1933. The Constitution is the new laws and rules that said how Germany would run. Democracy, a system where all the people have a say in what happens. Article 48, now this is something we haven't talked about yet, but it gave the president the power to make any changes he wanted in times of emergency. And then proportional representation, which leads to too many governments or too many parties in government, and it's very difficult to get a majority. Okay, there's definitely advantages to proportional representation, but in a time of crisis, sometimes it's not the best form of government. Okay, anyway. All right, so I'm going to do that now. Here is the essence of the Weimar Constitution, how the government was set up. So you've got a president that's elected by the people every 7 years. They choose a chancellor, should be non-political, and didn't really get involved in the Reichstag. Could call and dismiss the Reichstag and call new elections, and was the head of state in Germany. Now, underneath is the chancellor, chosen by the president, usually from the biggest party, head of the government, and he ran the country and made the decisions. He then chose a cabinet to help him. First chancellor was Frederick Ebert that we just learned about. Okay, so if you look down, we'll just go vertically for a second. You have the Reichsrat, local government, elected every 4 years, represented the different regions of Germany. The number of representatives depended on the size of the region. So that's how many representatives you get in parliament. Normally had to approve laws created by the Reichstag. And then you have the Reichstag, more powerful of the two houses, controlled laws and taxation. Elected by the people, the chancellor needed the support of the majority of the houses to pass any laws. Okay, so that's sort of your up and down structure. Now, some more of the specifics. If we go back to the president, if you look at these lateral lines, the president could enact Article 48, which allowed the president emergency powers to restore public safety and order. A lot of presidents have a clause like that written into various constitutions, where they don't have to go through Congress. If there's a state of emergency, they can take action straight away. They also have control of the law courts and judges. This is the president. They pleaded their allegiance to the president and Germany, not the chancellor. This stopped the legal system being corrupted. And the president also had control of the army. Non-political force swore their oath of loyalty to Germany and the president as their supreme commander, not to the chancellor. This meant political parties couldn't use their power to remove opposition. Okay, now if you look at the bottom, but this has actually got upward arrows, the electorate. All men and women, I believe over the age of 21, representatives using proportional representation. You had the right to vote. Percentage of votes for each party relates to the percentage of seats in the House gained. Okay, so if your party got 17% of the vote, that was the percentage you got in Parliament. All right, very different system to the United States, which is a two-party system. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, strengths and weaknesses of the Weimar Constitution. I'm actually going to pause the video momentarily again, and I'm going to let you work through this. You can jot this down. You're going to read through each of these descriptions and decide if you think it's a strength or a weakness of the Weimar Constitution. So I'm just going to pause and then give you a chance to do it and then restart the video. Okay, so Look, when you do these, you can start whenever you like the video. So let's see how we've done. So the president got lots of power. He could choose the chancellor, take control of the army, call new elections, and use Article 48 to suspend democracy and act as a dictator. And that goes down as, oh, they've done them all at once. Look at that. A weakness. Okay, anyway. There were checks and balances to make sure no other party ever got too much power or that laws could be made and changed too easily. Also, people could elect to change the president every 7 years, so that was viewed as a strength. The next one going down, the Constitution was very democratic. Men and women could vote. The voting age was reduced from 25 to 21, and all Germans had equal rights, so there was a strength. Down at the bottom, the Republic still had many enemies. It had relied on force to stop riots and rebellions. Was it sensible to give equal rights to those who wished to destroy it? Some extreme left and right-wing parties wanted to be a part of the new government just so they could destroy it. And that is a weakness. Moving on to the top right. Proportional representation meant all political parties had a fair share of the seats in the Reichstag according to the number of votes got. 10% of the votes, you got 10% of the seats. And that was viewed as a strength. Each of the 18 regions of Germany got to keep its own local parliament, or the Länder, with its own traditions. However, states could sometimes be hostile to the national government and even try to overthrow it. That's viewed as a strength, but that sounds to me like a weakness. Proportional representation resulted in lots of small parties being in government. If one party could not get a majority, governments had to make coalitions. We see this even today in some parliaments, made up of many different parties. They would often argue, lacked strong, clear policy. Therefore, a strong government was hard to achieve, and that's a weakness. And then finally, the bottom one, the lack of a strong single-party government was a problem during a crisis, then swift decisions were needed. The solution was Article 48. In a crisis, the chancellor could ask the president to pass laws without the support of the Reichstag, so they could bypass it. By 1930, the chancellor regularly relied on the president to pass laws rather than relying on votes in the Reichstag, therefore bypassing democracy. This made the Constitution seem weak and made people think that an all-powerful leader was better than an elected parliament. So again, that is a weakness for the Constitution. Okay, so what we're going to do is a practice question. Now, one of the questions you will get is what's called an inference question, where you're going to get a source of some kind and you are going to have to make an inference on it. So it says, give 2 things you can infer from source A about how well Germany was being governed in November 1918. Now, you don't just list these inferences. You need to state how you know it or why. Okay, so the best way to answer this is source A suggests, and this is called your inference. And then I know this because the source tells me. This means you have support from the source and you're supporting your inference. So you do this twice because you have to find 2 things and you should get your full marks. So what we'll do is we'll work through 1. Okay, so now our source is not the photo. Our source is what's written above by a man called Jan Smuts. And he was a South African politician visiting Germany in 1918. And he wrote about what he saw. So it says, Germany lies in ruins. Exhausted by the most terrible tragedy in history, World War I, with its people broken, starving, despairing from sheer exhaustion, struggling forward along the paths of anarchy and war, disorder with no strong authority. Okay, so I would say a good inference is that you could infer from the source that Germany is in a terrible state. How do we know this? What does he tell us that tells us that Germany is in this terrible, maybe we should say terrible state economically? Well, we'll say it's terrible state overall. Now, how do we know this? Well, he gives several examples, and you would only have to really state one. He states its people are broken, they're starving, they're despairing from sheer exhaustion. It's struggling forward along the paths of anarchy and war. Okay, so you could take any one of those. The author states, the people of Germany are exhausted and starving. Due to the effects of World War I. Okay, that is one inference with support. Now, if you did something similar a second time, maybe talked about how they're on the verge of anarchy as well, you could say that they're the political state, the political situation in Germany is dire, being that they could fall into anarchy or even get back into a warlike situation, maybe a civil war. Should get full marks for that. Okay, so that's just an example of how you can answer an inference question and get full marks. That. Now, what I'm going to have you do. There we go. And let's get rid of meditation bars. I will hope that you can use the PowerPoint from the video and pause it, or, well, what I'm going to do is print all this up on a sheet for you. So what you can do this activity, if you like. The new Constitution made the Weimar Republic weak. How far do you agree? And you could try to consider both sides of that argument, the strengths and weakness, the sheet that I'm going to have printed up for you. Oh no, I'm sorry, that's not what I'm going to have printed up for you. Never mind. But you can refer to that, look at some of the strengths, look at some of the weaknesses, and come to a judgment just for practice. And then you can look at the challenge if you like. Sort the problems with the Constitution in order of importance, how weak each one made the Weimar Republic, and give reasons for your answers. Okay, these are all practice things that you can do. All right. Okay, that is the lesson for today. I hope you found it informative. Please do read through the text pages. If you have the textbook, it will give you a lot more detail on, on the topic and some other sources to look at and some other practice questions. Okay, again, I hope to see you for the next lesson. If you have any questions, please do email me and I will make a worksheet for this as well that you can work on, and possibly another source thing that you can do an inference from. Okay, take care and see you next time.